All right. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Let's see. Go here, make sure I get this working right. So my name is Kenneth Coulter. I'm the Visualization and Interactive Design Manager for HDR. I know the title is a little hard to understand exactly, but basically subject matter expert, business developer, coder, and artist, all in one. And today I wanted to go over more of a realistic view of what clients are buying. Like a lot of people, I love excellent marketing and fancy R&D, but I didn't feel like that would really be as advantageous. That's not really what clients are buying, most of the time. Also discuss a little bit about how the business of these technologies has evolved at HDR, what some of the successes and limitations have been, as well as some future considerations and opportunities. So HDR is a pretty big company. We're one of the largest AEC firms for design in the world, with over 12,000 employees, quite a few offices where we operate around the country, 16 markets that we serve, and we've been doing it for almost 108 years now. Within that, for engineering, transportation is our largest market, and for architecture, it's healthcare, where we've been listed or ranked as #1 for healthcare and architecture 25 times, not sequentially, but 25 times. For projects like this. So this is the Ottawa Hospital. This is our current and ongoing project that we've been working on. As a quick overview of the process for anybody that doesn't really understand the flow for architecture, especially in engineering, everything starts with a request for proposal. Once all of those selections have been made, it moves into the interview process, and then from there, the selection is made. If HDR is hired at that point, then the attorneys get to have a field day and contracts start to move into design. So the design process is a lot more intense than what you see here. It's not just one phase. It's a long phase with a lot of different stages and milestones in it. But basically, for the intent for this is to keep it more simple. But that can take months to years, depending on the size of the project. And the key thing that I wanted to point out about this and how it relates to utilizing these technologies is that the first 2 steps for RFP and interview, that is all usually something that is done, aside from the occasional edge case, on HDR overhead. So this is not a place where we can get fee. The fee doesn't usually come in until we get to design. So when I started working with HDR about 13 years ago, this is pretty much the process that everything flowed from left to right. Everything started in RFP, moved into interview, and now the goal has been to obviously earn money with these technologies. My main goal or motto that I kind of go by is conveying these designs using easily accessible technologies. We're all familiar with time constraints and budget. Security was pretty new to me. So with HDR, there's a lot of confidentiality concerns, security. So hosting things on third-party servers is usually frowned upon or not allowed due to contract limitations. And then easily accessible is something that I've had to get a lot better at over the years. So we all love fancy. We'd love to do the highest technology that we can. And I mean no disrespect to our clients, but typically their knowledge level starts and begins with Microsoft Word or Office in general. And ends with social media. So they don't have the technologic prowess, that a lot of people that are here have. So having to take a lot of that into concern or into consideration, a lot of what has been the primary deliverables that we've done have been WebGL. It's not AR and VR, but there's a reason why I mention it here. Leave behind ARs have been huge, and I have some examples of that. 360 images or pseudo VR for those of us that utilize this technology versus real VR and being able to move freely in the environment. These are still really successful and used quite substantially. And then, of course, real VR, if you will. You can see from the graph, these are all the projects that I've done since I started. And WebGL is the top one in purple. So you can see that that's the most predominant one. And it's really been an excellent gateway. So being able to do a lot of models on the web and show that to clients has led to more opportunities with VR and AR. And then there's been a lot of 360 equal rectangular as well as web-based AR. And then it gets down to dedicated AR apps for AR, iOS or Android, then MetaQuest VR, and then MR has recently started taking off, but not a whole lot, just since Quest 3 has come out. So these are a lot of the software packages that I use. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of them, but the basic idea is you get models and what do you do with it? So a lot of working in 3D and a lot of game engines and what we can do with it from that, and A-frame, other solutions. D5 is a great solution for a lot of architectural visualization. So this is an example, just to go through some of the examples of what are most popular. Of a leave behind. So for a data center pursuit, this was a leave behind that had the QR code on the left. You scan the QR code, goes to a website. The target for the AR is on the right side of the page. So this was utilized during an interview and as a leave behind, like I mentioned, to help to convey to the client our technical fortitude and knowledge and history of our experience with data centers. And this is a heat recovery system. So these, like I said, have been really helpful. So not only do you get to do the RFP where you can show some stuff, but then during the interview, you make your impression, and then you leave something behind that the client can then access later. And I have had feedback that has told me directly that a lot of these have actually helped win us jobs. So the web GL stuff, this is a lot of model review, typically at the room level. So clients have the ability to view objects from more of an aerial overview, if you will. And then from here, they can go into a first-person view and walk around the space. So it's great for design review. It's great for equipment planning, placement, strategy, and staffing concerns and considerations, as well as materials and finishes. That same type of solution, taken into a dedicated iOS app, you still have the model review process and adding however many rooms that we need to have for that. But then I also integrated tap-to-place augmented reality as well as marker-based, just depending on the use case. So from within that one app, you can do the whole model review of whatever it is that environment is, go to something like tap-to-place. Most people are probably familiar with this. You get your horizontal surface, and then the one-to-one AR has been really helpful, especially if you have enough room to walk around in it. So this is extremely advantageous for our client base. Then there's also the ability to change some of the model scales to a lot of architectural standard sizes. The other one is the 360 equal rectangular images. So if you're not super familiar with these images look a little funky, but when it's wrapped around a sphere, you get a really nice capability to look around the environment, inspect the design, inspect the materials and finishes. On the left is the web-based version, and on the right is the mobile version. It uses the same app, so it only has to be deployed once. And then you can see there's navigation triangles in here. So essentially, when you focus on that, it just reloads another sphere. And everything is oriented in such a way within like a global coordinate system so that it keeps it oriented. So when you move to the next location, it feels like you've just gone straight forward. So these are really helpful. These have been huge for a lot of use cases. And like I said, a lot of clients, they just want to use their phone. They just want to use a computer. And it makes it really easy. It makes it convenient for them and for them to be able to review the project. The same technology has been utilized a lot for capturing existing conditions with photography, like with a Ricoh Theta or a similar 360 camera. And then on the right side, when the camera or the device is turned into landscape mode, you can still look around with the gyroscope and monoscopic view, or you can go into VR mode and get the stereoscopic view. And a lot of times, this also ties into the leave behinds and public involvement in other areas where we use this. We'll do custom branded VR headsets. So a lot of those are similar to something like this, where you can buy these headsets online that are unbranded. You can put all of your marketing and cool information on it. And then we'll put the QR code on it so the client can very easily scan it with their phone, drop it into the headset, and be off and running. The reason I put this in here and the tab is highlighted is if anybody has used this and run into problems or thinking about using these in the future, my one tip for the day is to make sure you get the ones that have the lens adjustments on the side to adjust the IPD, so the interpupillary distance, because all of our eyes are at different distances. So a lot of times, If you get the ones that are affixed, the lenses, you'll run into the issue where a lot of people will have double vision or they'll have blurriness because of that eye variation. And it's not the app that's the problem, it's the viewer. So just make sure you get this with the tabs. So one of the keystone projects that I got to work on in 2016 was the 75th Memorial of Pearl Harbor. A huge reason why this was such a keystone project is up until this point, as I aforementioned, the RFP and the interview process was really kind of where things were stuck in that art of the possible, one-offs, try to help showcase what we could do and give people a little bit more information to help win a project. But this was the first time we did a really large project utilizing these types of technologies that showed to the company that there really were a lot of opportunities to earn fee from doing this type of work. And it was also really invaluable to the Park Service. So this was a combined effort with HDR, the Pacific Historic Parks, as well as the National Park Service that runs the park on Oahu. So we created 3 different interactive applications for this, went out to Hawaii, ran a Scrum workshop, did the user stories, all that fun stuff for Agile. And from that, I came up with 3 ideas on the plane ride back and a couple of branded cardboard concepts. So this gives you kind of an idea of the ones that are affixed that you shouldn't get, but the way that you can brand them. So this is really pretty cool if you do it up well with your graphics department. Here's another one. So the first app was being able to visit the memorial in 360. So at the time, I think this was the same year that Quest 1 and HoloLens came out. So we didn't have enough time to look at doing something with those. The other thing is that these technologies this application needed to work on pretty much any phone. At the time, they had about 1 million visitors per year to the park and all types of phones from all around the world. So that's why we went with more of a web-based solution, but everything was integrated into a Unity app, still using a browser technology integrated within that. It was pretty cool when I was there. I got to go onto places that were really unique, that very few people get to go to. So I got to go on the roof and take pictures. I got to go onto the moorings. So that was pretty fun and take a lot of pictures with that using a Ricoh Theta. We also did a Witness the Attack on Battleship Row. This was neat. I got to work with a historian for the National Park Service to ensure that everything was accurate, the time of day was accurate, the ship's locations, the amount of water explosions, all of that. And there's a couple of different key times for the application where it shows the different waves and some of the different key moments from the attack. And then, so those were all 360s, and the second one, the Battleship Row, was a combination of composited rendering with photography. And this one was the only one that was a true model that you could walk around and move around. So the idea with this was that you would be able to visit the USS Arizona prior to it being sunk. So this is from December 6th when the vessel was coming back from San Diego. Another keystone project, it's still using 360s, but this was for Alloway Bridge, also on Oahu. The project, or the reason that they needed a visualization for this, was that there was a lot of concern and a lot of commotion from the locals on island as to the visual impact of the bridge, as well as the impact to the waterway for Alloway, because there's a lot of kayaking and canoeing that happens up and down that river. So they wanted something that would help showcase what the bridge would actually look like. I had 2 days to build something. I had 4 days. The last day is deployment. The day before that is review and button anything up, so really 2 days. So I had no time to do a bunch of really fancy 3D modeling, so we did 360 renders. But if you're familiar with doing any development for Android, there's a 2K limit on images. So you can't do any images that are larger than 2048 by 2048. And if you blow that up to huge inside of the Oculus, it looks terrible. Like, it just doesn't look good at all. So the solution that I came up with, which isn't crazy rocket science, but it worked really well, was to break the sphere that all of the images went onto into 8 equal sections. And through a unique way of UV mapping it, I could just marquee select these individual squares and capture the high-res image so that each one of these was 2K. And that helped to create a much better final version. So this is inside of Unity where everything is assembled, and this gives you a good idea of how when it's broken up, each one of those is 2K instead of 2K for everything. So the final solution is a lot like a normal 360. You can move around, use the controller to jump points. And that's pretty cool and everything. And I wanted to do more with it, but 2 days doesn't give you a lot. So what I did come up with or was able to do was add a mini map to the left controller that you'll see here, where you could also move around non-linearly. So it added a little bit of extra functionality to it. And then from there also added some infographics that you could pull up that tied into public involvement. So it was one all-encompassing application to be able to get the requisite information for the deliverable. And this was the only time since I've been with HDR that the client absolutely required the Oculus Quest. So it had to be on that. So that's why this was the solution. Another really cool solution, if you haven't used it, is augmented reality tied to a physical model. So instead of just using a QR code marker or using an image target or tapping to place to put something into an environment, you can use capture a point cloud with an app that's available for AR Kit. So you can download that, build it to your phone, capture a scan of the 3D model. And this is one of the first prototypes that I did. And this is for Saddle Creek in Omaha. And it was neat. You can add video to it, do all kinds of cool stuff. And then this shows you what the point cloud capture looks like. So once you build that app out with AR Kit, you can scan everything, and then you can actually use a square that shows up in the environment to establish the boundaries so that you're not capturing everything, you're only getting what you actually need. So this technology was used, it's been used a lot, but the first time it was used as kind of that keystone project where we really got it up and running was for Focal Point Community Campus in Chicago. And this was more for the conceptual phase at this point. This was not the final design by any means, but we needed to present with the client in downtown Chicago to the board and to investors for philanthropy what the vision was, what the idea was. And the design principal that I worked with wanted to utilize this technology to go along with the $12,000 physical model that we paid for and had built so that he could use his phone and tie that to, well, firewire to HDMI to the computer and the computer to the TV. So it actually worked really well. It was super smooth. And the entire application, I laid it out so that it went seamlessly along with his presentation to showcase the vision. And once the presentation was done, it afforded him the opportunity to have excellent one-to-ones with a lot of the clients and a lot of the board and people that were there to potentially invest money in the solution. So you can see him here walking through one of the, using the app to walk through the design vision. And then using the same application to build one out that was just pure AR for tap and place. While we were at it, why not? The other thing is you can't carry that $12,000 model around very easily. So this enabled everybody to be able to view it elsewhere. So I know I went through a lot of things pretty fast, a lot of different use cases and examples, but one of the things that I started looking at in the past couple of years was how to upsell a lot of this. So like I mentioned, those first initial phases, we're not really earning fee on that. Once it got into design and we started making money on it, there wasn't really a program built around it. So it was more one-offs, and you're glad when you get something, you try to pitch it. So I had a lot of solutions and a lot of ideas and things that I've tried over the years, and actually this is the one that's really seemed to pick up momentum. And that is talking with clients about a universal optimization effort. So once we get the contract, because we work with models so much, the idea is, right, that has to be optimized, it has to be performant. The main idea is that this stuff isn't going to work, especially with web on the AR, for AR or VR, it just will say no. So we have to go through a lot of optimization effort. The information on the right-hand side are standard of task items that I will put into a contract that the client has no idea what I'm talking about. So I put in images like this to explain to them, here's one single model from structural. And if you know anything about modeling, that is garbage. So from here, I can take that and create something that's only 24 vertices instead of 25. I know that there's a lot of services out there that we can't utilize because of security. There's also a lot of stuff built into Maya 3D Max. There's applications like Balancer that I use a lot from Atango. They're great solutions, but what I found is that most of that works really well for organic stuff. My background is in medical illustration. I have a master's in that. And that stuff worked really well for organic stuff and decimating it and still maintaining the shape and form that you need. But when you get to something that's this rectilinear, it just doesn't work. It goes to garbage. So then when you talk about at a larger scale, this is just a canopy. So you can see that this canopy up at the top left that's not optimized is just shy of 1 million vertices just by itself, which is massive. So working on that takes about 4 hours of work. I think it took me to get it down to about 2,500. So you can imagine when you go from just a canopy to a giant campus or a giant hospital, it will crash everything if it's not optimized. So the way that it usually works with a client is I'll pitch this universal optimization effort, explain to them and show some of this to say this is why there's a 50 to 150 hour task on doing that. But now the conversation becomes, what do you want to do with it? And at this point, when we've hit design and the contract for design, or if this is an ad service during the design process, typically they've already seen some of this technology from the RFP and interview process. So they're not coming into it completely cold. But I'll start the conversation by talking with them about, what is it that you want to use it for? If I start with, do you want to do AR or VR, they typically look at me like a deer in headlights. So I'll talk to them about what do you want to use it for? Philanthropy, design review, equipment placement, all of these different options for the use case. And one thing I'll say is that, like I mentioned, there wasn't a lot of money made at first. It started to progress to about $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 for one of these apps. The past couple of projects that I've done utilizing this approach, I'm up to about $150,000 to $200,000 a project now, by using this kind of a la carte service to say, we've done this one approach, everything's ready to go, what do you want to do with it? Sometimes they'll start with some things in the beginning of design, we'll get to stage 2 or stage 3, they'll say they need it for something else. So at that point, we do additional contracts. So it's been a really beneficial way to approach things. I know it may seem kind of silly to some people, but it really seems to work. And then one of the projects that it's worked on with really well recently has been in healthcare, well, a couple of them. So when we start our design process, it's so amazing, it's done with tape. And from tape, we'll migrate up to cardboard and bringing in equipment to also fill in the space so everybody gets a good idea of the space and layout. And then from there, they will go into a one-to-one mock-up. And typically, the constructed mock-up is the patient room, and the reason for that is that it's so ubiquitous and widely used throughout a hospital. There might be 2 ORs, 4 ERs, or 4 ERs, 2 ERs, but there's hundreds of patient rooms. And the patient experience is paramount to the design process, so it's a combination of focusing on the patient experience as well as focusing on making sure that the one room that's reused over and over and over again is really solid. So what I did for these projects, and unfortunately I can't show some of it from the Ottawa Hospital, was a lot of the WebGL stuff, and I have an example of that next, but building a lot of these rooms in WebGL, also doing a virtual reality walkthrough for the patient room. And what was great about it was that even though the app cost a lot of money, on the back end, they saved hundreds of thousands of dollars by only having to do the one-to-one mock-up once. Because not only do you have the construction costs, but then you have to fly everybody in from around the country or world. You have to fly in all the executives, all the board members, the planners, the strategists, to walk the room, to review the room. And that isn't cheap when you start talking about flights, their time, food, everything else. And then the construction. So being able to talk to clients and say, yeah, there's a $50,000 to $100,000 cost to build these interactively, but you're going to save hundreds of thousands on the backside has been really beneficial and helped to grow that service as well. So the WebGL rooms that I've built out, if you've built out WebGL from Unity, it always builds everything out as one HTML page that's associated with a Unity application. But what I worked on was a single sign-on solution that met all of our required security standards. So between the HTML, several HTML pages in the Unity application in C#, I did a lot of work with building out a solution that would communicate via iframe connectivity or communication and send message with Unity so that it carries all the token authentication through the entire application so that you have a one-stop shop. It's just one URL where you can load in all of these different experiences. These rooms were done only in grisaille or black and white. There was no need to do finishes and materials. This was only for equipment placement and design review for the room at this point. So that's why it's black and white. And then it's also grown and been used so much at this point. Like any good developer, I've been documenting everything. In the event that I get hit by a bus, or I have a really good mentee like this cool dude sitting right here that also works at HDR, so that we can help to grow this service and I'm not the only one doing it. We also did a lot of renderings for this project for Henry Ford. So these are pretty cool. And this starts to showcase more of that holistic vision where we've done the modeling work. Now what do you want to do with it? So the WebGL rooms, rendering, and then there's also an augmented reality piece that was done for a gala, and this was utilized by 11,000 people. So a lot of these other apps are used by 5 to 10 people. This was 11,000. And I utilized Vectory, which is a really great app if you've never used it. And the reason I was able to use that is because this was okay to show to the public, so it didn't have to be hosted on our servers and wasn't completely locked down. So I utilized Vectory and it has a web app interface. This was all on the iPad. So from the web interface, you can interact with the model, rotate it. I added labels for key information and aspects of the design, and then some information that pops up. And then from here, it also has an augmented reality experience that you get from the same model, so that's pretty cool. And the way to, as another tip, to make this stuff look really good between both experiences to keep it looking similar is to use light mapping. So if you're not familiar with light mapping, you can use something like Maya or 3D Max to essentially bake all of the lighting, all the shadows, ambient occlusion into the texture map, and then that's placed onto the model. And in something like Vectory, those light maps are set to be the object's color and emission, so that you actually have no lights in the scene. It's all done via texture map. So that way when it goes between the online version like this and it goes between the AR, that object looks almost as close to identical as possible. If you didn't do that, it would look good in the web version. It would look like garbage in AR. Because it's available, if anybody wants to scan the QR code, you are more than welcome to try this out. If you don't want to do it now, I know all this stuff's going to be available later, but this will take you directly to the app. And so I think it's a good milestone. So it's gone from the art of the possible and what can we even do with this to last month, these types of technologies being shown as the first image on our externally facing website. So it's great to see that level of adoption. It's taken quite a while, like I said, almost 13 years, but it's pretty cool to see how it's evolved. Some of the considerations for future, we do a lot of stuff with Unreal, but the problem is just based on security and a lot of limitations, it's pretty much stuck in 2D and animation right now, which is still great, and it's cool that we can get these visuals and use a real-time engine to capture that. But there's a lot of issues with the security. We can't use EXEs at our company due to security. A lot of our clients can't use EXEs because of security. So, and then if you try to build something for iOS that has a password protection to it, it will just say no. You can't deploy anything through iOS, which I'm surprised. I feel like if you're doing it through TestFlight, which is the internal review process where we can test something that hasn't been posted to the global, to the world to be able to use for internal testing, that especially if it's on a corporate account, I feel like you should be able to do that, right? Because it's not going to everyone, but they still lock it down. So we've obviously been looking at pixel streaming, which is also another security issue because we can't send our files to a third-party, pixel streaming solution like NVIDIA or other. So we've started the process of getting it working internally, and there's the other IT hurdle, and it's like, everybody, the saying goes, is trying to steer the Titanic. So we're getting there, but this will be something that we're looking to do. And I haven't been to the expo yet, but I know everybody's probably familiar with the Meta Orion glasses. There's also a lot of cool augmented reality contact lenses that are coming out. I know there's some either already available or going to be available very soon, but they're still pretty limited in the graphics. I think you can get kind of like a heads-up display of the weather or key information, but it's not like you can put augmented reality glasses in and have a Vive experience yet, right? But I think once it gets there and once these glasses, they'll look cooler, and there's wider consumer adoption, I think that'll be a lot better for the industry in general, especially for HDR. And a lot of it just has to do with the ability to use things easily. I still have a hard time just getting clients to put a VR headset on. They feel like they look silly, they don't want to put it on, they have no experience with the technology. If they have 2 days to use the app for design review, they spend 1 day just figuring out where the buttons are. So that's not very conducive to a good design review. So we don't use that as much as I would like. So I think once things that are a little cooler looking, more comfortable, more, more consumer ready, and it gets to the point where it's more like a phone or a computer and people have that level of comfort, I think it'll really go a long way to doing that. And I know there's some augmented reality glasses out and all that. I think their control mechanic for the Orion is really cool, where it has the wrist attachment, where it reads your finger movements to be able to scroll through stuff instead of having to look like a doofus, doing this to scroll through things. So I think that it's going in the right direction, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So I am always happy to talk shop and geek out with fellow developers if you want to contact me. And to make it a little bit easier, here's yet another QR code to go to my LinkedIn page. So thank you very much for your time. I hope that it was informative.